We're coming down from one of the largest solar storms of this solar cycle, and we'll talk about how it affected amateur radio and GPS during Hurricane Lane. And a new active region has emerged on the Earth-facing sun, and it's got even more scientists saying, hello, solar cycle 25. Those stories and more in the news this week. Space weather this week has gotten outrageously busy. We had a filament eruption that launched an Earth-directed solar storm, which really didn't seem like it was all that big a deal when it launched. I mean, it was moving extremely slowly. We knew that there was a finger-like coronal hole that opened up afterwards, which might send us some fast wind on its heels, but still, we really thought its slow speed would make it, kind of a ho-hum kind of storm. But its slow speed was the magic ingredient, because when this thing hit Earth, it just kind of stalled, and it like stormed and stormed and stormed for so many hours. Sounds kind of like Hurricane Lane, doesn't it? And this thing affected amateur radio, it affected GPS, and I'll get more into that later, and it became one of the top 5 storms of this solar cycle. Now, we're calming down from that, thank goodness, but we will have some gorgeous aurora all over the world to show you a little bit later. But this isn't the only story. We have a new active region that has emerged on the Earth-facing disk, and at first we weren't really sure, but this is yet another region from the new solar cycle. And what's more is that this region hasn't kind of gone back down under the surface, it's actually rotating to the backside. So we're going to be watching it very carefully on the sun's backside, and who knows, maybe it'll emerge back on the front side in about 2 weeks. Now, the good news is amateur radio operators and emergency responders, we do have a new region that is rotating into Earth view here on the sun's east limb here in the next couple days. So solar flux will probably stay at the top end of poor, maybe even the low end of marginal over this next week. Switching to your M-flare threat meter, you can see the X-ray flux continues to be extremely low, and therefore by proxy the solar flux is low. Now right around the 24th and the 25th we got a boost in the X-ray flux just a little bit. You can even see some B-class flares popping. That was from the emergence of the new region from solar cycle 25. It grew really fast and it gave us a nice boost to the solar flux for a few days, which really was perfect timing because it helped amateur radio propagation stay up just a little bit during this horrible solar storm that we just went through. But then it kind of stabilized and the flux died a little bit. And since then, those 2 regions, that region and one other one, have rotated to the sun's backside. So we're once again back down to the high end of poor, maybe the low end of marginal. But we have a new region that's going to be rotating into Earth view in the next day or 2, and it might boost the solar flux up just a little bit more. Switching to our solar storm conditions, we had been hovering between unsettled to active conditions, basically from some small pockets of fast wind and a little bit of mini solar storm action, and then bam! See that on the 26th? That was the solar storm. Whammo! We went up to a G2 level and then a G3 level storm. This hit hard and it wiped the amateur radio bands, especially around the frequencies that people were using for emergency communications for Hurricane Lane. And we had, count them, 21 hours of straight storm level conditions, which is awful when you consider how much devastation was going on in Hawaii right now. I was a nail biter the whole time. Since then, things calmed down a little bit, then whammo, we went right back up into storm levels when the fast wind hit that followed this very slow solar storm. Luckily, since then, things have calmed down, and it looks like we can finally say it's all clear. And during this incredibly intense solar storm, we had gorgeous aurora all over the world, and I thank all the field reporters for sending me photos. I can't possibly show them all this week, so I'm actually going to show some of them next week as well. And the lucky thing was it was the beginning of aurora season in the northern hemisphere, so we got some gorgeous shots from places like Finland, and in Sweden, and Russia, and in Scotland. And if we go over the pond, we saw it in Ontario, Canada, and in Manitoba, and in Yellowknife. And if we drop down into the United States, we saw it in Maine. It was also in New Hampshire and Vermont, and I'll show you that next time. It made it to South Dakota, We saw the lights in Michigan, and it even made it as far south as Colorado. And then if we go to the south, the southern lights were visible in Tasmania and in many places in New Zealand. Now, since this is the second time I've seen an intense solar storm impact radio communications and GPS while a hurricane was endangering lives, I thought I'd share this special segment with you that includes some very special field reports. There is no doubt that Hurricane Lane was a close call. Luckily, it didn't make landfall, but even at that, its slow speed and intensity was enough to cause massive flooding on the Big Island, leaving some people stranded and without the comforts of home. Had the situation been worse, amateur radio operators would have been a lifeline of communications. But just like last year in Puerto Rico with Hurricane Irma, an extreme space weather event came at the wrong time. Indeed, it made for a perfect storm. When the solar storm hit, amateur radio went down. John M0JSX from England reported, "Okay, who cut my feeder? 20 meters shouldn't be that dead, surely." And he posted a picture of a flat spectrum. Shortly thereafter, he posted this: 40 meters, not much better. And it was like this over in the United States as well. John Pasterfield, KB7 TBT, a controller for the YL system, which is up 365 days a year on both 20 and 40 meters, said at the beginning of the solar storm, the noise on the bands was so bad it sounded like people were frying bacon in the background. And later, when the storm hit its peak, he said, "The better luck that others are having are gone. 6 control stations and haven't had a check-in in 20 minutes. It's broke." Sadly, these conditions continued for the next 21 hours. And sadly, these were the same radio bands used by the emergency responders to Hurricane Lane. But amateur radio wasn't the only thing to be impacted. GPS reception was also tough during and after the storm, even as far south as Arkansas. Lewis Haskett, a precision farmer, reported, "For y'all that like space weather, it's definitely jacking up GPS. Along with that, the satellites are north of Arkansas-Mississippi line. That's the reason for the smile on my face." He don't look that happy, does he? In fact, later he mentioned having conversations with others that were easily 100 miles away, who too were having the same reception issues as he. Now, these reports aren't beautiful Aurora photos, but they're just as important to me. So I want to give a special thanks to these field reporters for sharing this critical information at such a critical time and showing how space weather really does affect our everyday lives. Especially during hurricane season, it gives us all something to think about. So what else does the sun have in store for us this week? Well, this is stereo A. It's our backside monitor. You can see here's Earth, here's the sun, and here's stereo A staring at the sun from behind. And hey, there's some activity on the backside for a change. We have a bright region that's sitting kind of in the middle of the backside in stereo's view, and it's flanked by 2 dark coronal holes. This is good news for amateur radio operators because as that region rotates into Earth view here in the next couple days, it's going to give a little kiss to the solar flux and hopefully boost the radio propagation just a little bit. And then those 2 dark coronal holes, well, that means small pockets of fast wind will be on their way, and that's good news for Aurora photographers because we might get a small solar storm or at least some activity, especially at high latitudes in the next couple of weeks. Switching to your solar storm conditions, what a difference a day makes, folks. After that incredibly intense solar storm, everything is in the green. We're expecting unsettled conditions pretty much everywhere. Now, at high latitudes, NOAA's giving us about a 20 to 25% chance of a minor storm. And this is because Earth's magnetic shield is a bit conditioned, and it just doesn't take very much to get it rattled since that big solar storm. So you might still see some aurora sporadically here and there at high latitudes over the next couple days. Now, at mid-latitudes, we're only expecting about a 10 to 15% chance of active conditions, and things should begin to really settle down here as the week progresses. Switching to your solar flare and particle radiation storm outlook over the coming week, after all of the activity, we are finally back to a spotless sun. This means we have no risk for any big flares or radio blackouts this week, which should make you GPS operators happy. And we are sitting at the marginal level for radio propagation, right around the low end of marginal, which should make amateur radio operators and emergency responders a bit happy. Even better news is that we actually have a new region that's going to be rotating into Earth view here in the next couple days, and that could boost the solar flux up a little bit more to get us a little bit higher into that marginal range, hopefully, and these conditions should continue easily for the next week. So the space weather this week has been incredibly exciting. We're just now coming down from a massive solar storm that was actually one of the strongest solar storms in this current solar cycle. And it could have spelled disaster had Hurricane Lane made landfall in Hawaii. On top of that, we had an emergence of an active region that we weren't quite sure at first, but it is confirmed it is an active region from the upcoming solar cycle, and it's got scientists thinking, maybe solar cycle 25 is going to come sooner than we thought. Now, since then, that region and another have rotated to the sun's backside, so we're back to a spotless sun, and that should make GPS users happy. We also have a new region that's going to be rotating Earth's side here in the next couple days, and that should boost the solar flux into the marginal range, even higher into the marginal range that we already have. So that makes radio propagation do a little bit better, so amateur radio operators should be happy. And that region's flanked by a couple small coronal holes, which could send us some more fast wind here in about 2 weeks, and that should make Aurora photographers happy. I'm Tamitha Skove. Thank you for watching.